friends, it's Mr. Review, and I'm here to make the complex simple and the confusing clear. Public policy is the manifestation of government action. Public policy is the embodiment of public consensus on any given issue, taking the form of legislation, implementation, and adjudication. Governments, by definition, make laws, enforce said laws, and are called upon to settle the disputes over those laws. Simply put, the study of public policy is the political science laboratory. The action verbs of government at all levels invariably entangle public policy. But how is public policy made? How are public policies implemented? And who settles the disputes? CitizenU, along with me, Mr. Review, are here to help. We'll be archiving public policies here on A.P.P. In doing so, students of government will better understand how our public institutions work together to fulfill their civic duties. Today on Archiving Public Policy, today on A.P.P, we'll be looking at the Great American Bake-Off, National Marijuana Policy. Issue identified. On June 17, 1971, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs. In September of 1986, First Lady Nancy Reagan said, "Just say no." The war on drugs, however, goes back to the 1870s, when the first opium laws were passed. Most early regulations occurred at the state and local level. The first major federal action came with the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. For the first time, drugs like cocaine, heroin, and cannabis were labeled dangerous and addictive. The United States government, responding to progressive shifts in public opinion, would now regulate both medicinal and recreational narcotics. Throughout the 20th century, further campaigns against drug abuse grew in intensity. The evolution of such policies peaked following the troubled 60s and fallout from the Vietnam War. Marijuana was increasingly seen as the gateway drug to harder narcotics like LSD. Media reports hyped the crisis in suburbia, the hooked generation. In response, Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. Cannabis, i.e. marijuana, was labeled a Schedule I drug. Schedule I drugs, by definition, have no medical use and have a high potential for abuse. Minimum sentences all became a part of the tough-on-crime stance in the war on drugs. The Office of National Drug Control Policy was given cabinet-level authority. The war on drugs was supported by a broad consensus. Agenda setting. In time, that consensus would show signs of cracking. A new public policy agenda was developing at the state level. The war on drugs found significant challengers ready to take on the mighty national government. California led the charge with the passage of Proposition 215. With almost 60% of voter approval, a California initiative in 1996 permitted the medical use of cannabis. Prop 215 stood in direct defiance of national drug policy. Soon, other states would follow. Federal law enforcement authorities raided California cannabis clubs, seized property, and attempted to thwart the ever-expanding marketplace for marijuana. The United States Supreme Court, in the case Raich v. Gonzalez 2005, affirmed Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause to regulate controlled substances. In the war on drugs, the United States government was still supreme. Nevertheless, state and local governments flaunted their defiance. Elite and expert opinion was changing. Public consensus was changing too. With the election of Barack Obama in 2008, Americans elected for the first time a sitting president who admitted to using marijuana in his youth. The war on drugs was about to change. Policy formulation. The Obama administration was about to formulate a new marijuana policy. More would be spent on treatment. Obama would increase the use of clemency for nonviolent drug offenders. But perhaps most importantly, the Obama administration would look the other way when state and local governments passed ordinances allowing for both medicinal and recreational purposes. The Department of Justice would stop enforcing the federal ban on marijuana. The rules of engagement were changing in our war on drugs. Implementing the will of Congress and the courts was now up against a contrary will of the people. This new policy became clear in 2009 with the Ogden Memorandum. In a statement given by Deputy Attorney General David Ogden, the Obama Justice Department would shift law enforcement to higher priority prosecutions. Though not to be seen as a legal defense to violations of federal law, the Department of Justice was clearly formulating a new national marijuana public policy. The hardball tactics of earlier administrations ceased. A truce had been called in the war on drugs. National priority. From the beginning, national drug policy, like most policies, followed public sentiment. Legitimacy of public policy in America has always been rooted in the consent of the governed. The war on drugs was in its time supported widely by a broad spectrum of public policy players. Elites, medical professionals, elected officials, and most importantly, the American people. But priorities change. Implementation. The truce in the war on drugs came with consequences. $18 billion are still spent by federal and state governments fighting drug abuse each year. Last year, there were over 700,000 drug-related arrests in America. Nevertheless, marijuana sales, out in the open marijuana sales, exceeded last year over $1 billion. 84% of Americans favor legalizing the medicinal use of marijuana. And now, a clear majority of Americans favor legalization for recreational purposes. Close to 30 states have legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes, and close to 10 for recreational reasons. As it has been said, marijuana has been one of the most salient and contentious battlegrounds. Throughout our history, drug policies were made and drug policies were changed. Surely they will be changed again. The public policy process is long, complex, and competitive. The war on drugs has been no exception. You have been listening to A.P.P, Archiving Public Policy, presented by CitizenU, along with Mr. Review. We're here to make the complex simple and the confusing clear.